Okay, so now that we've spent some time talking about the course, we are going to drill in to the product. You have a new book to sell in comparative politics this fall. It's by the Clark author team, and in fact, it is a briefer version of the full book that you've already been selling. So we're going to talk about that brief version, how it's briefer, why it's briefer, and just how you're going to be successful with this book this fall. So let's get started. It's called Political Science for a reason. Most introductory texts in comparative are organized around a sequence of individual country studies. That usually includes some combination of Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Japan, etc. The country-by-country approach to teaching comparative politics has some obvious limitations if the goal of an introductory class was to teach something other than rote memorization and descriptive information about a tiny fraction of the world's countries. Clark takes a very different approach in both their principles book, which you've already been selling, and the new book, the Foundations book, which is briefer. The text focuses on the research questions that comparative scholars have historically considered to be vitally important. It is unique in its focus on the scientific approach to studying these questions. The key differences in the two texts, the full book and the Foundations book, lie in the level of detail involved in the approach. Principles, the full book, teaches students to solve these discipline-specific questions through a variety of game theoretic models, or teaching them to evaluate one-dimensional and two-dimensional spatial models, or simply how to interpret statistical results. A great option for this for instructors looking to challenge their students and get hands-on with research methods and data literacy with its end of chapter problem sets. While Principles, or the full book, is an important contribution to the comparative politics textbook market, not all students and faculty need the level of detail on this methods-based approach. This is why we've created the briefer, less expensive Foundations of Comparative Politics. So let's talk about the difference between the two. Knowing the difference in your Clarks. Like Principle, Foundations introduces students to the major questions in comparative politics and acquaints students with the field's best answers to those questions. Where Foundations is different is that it discusses this substantive science-based content without relying as heavily on specific methodological techniques like game theory and statistical analysis. Foundations concentrates on describing the core features of regimes and institutions and on analyzing how these fundamental attributes drive variation in the economic and political outcomes we care about most. By grappling with these essential characteristics of regimes and institutions, students develop a deep understanding of the foundations of comparative politics. The result, a shorter text more capable of being covered in a single semester. So while Foundations also seeks to convey the main findings in the comparative politics literature, it also devotes considerable time to explaining exactly why these findings hold and examining the extent to which a scholarly consensus exists in support of these findings. Rather than treat the different themes or topics in the book as completely independent, Foundations also seeks to highlight the inherent interdependencies that exist between them. Thus, the theories and empirical results presented in one chapter are often used in later chapters to examine and explain other political phenomena. In this way, there's a steady accumulation of theoretical and empirical knowledge throughout the book. So let's take a quick look at the TOC. The first three chapters of both books start out heavy on the science, introducing scientific method and what politics actually is. If you're looking at Principles, Part 2 includes 2 extra chapters not found in Foundations that delve deeper into the democracies and dictatorships. These were cut and abbreviated into other chapters. The remainder of both texts focuses heavily on describing the core features of regimes and institutions. Principles just goes deeper into analyzing how these fundamental attributes drive variation in economic and political outcomes. By grappling with these essential characteristics of regimes and institutions, students develop a deep understanding of the foundational principles of comparative politics. So basically, let's boil it down. They both take that same scientific approach, again, the science of political science and of comparative politics. The Principles book is the heavy hitter. It's almost 900 pages, 16 chapters, and this is really for that instructor who wants that heavy research methods approach. The question to ask with this one is, do your students need to improve their data literacy skills? So there's a really heavy focus on data analysis and data literacy. On the flip side of it, the Foundations book, again, takes that same scientific approach, right? So it's the same kind of realm of instructors that like that approach, but look at it. It's nearly half the size. It's a couple chapters less, right? We talked about the 2 chapters that were taken out and distributed to other places. It's significantly costs less, so $94 versus $122. And let's talk now about kind of the strategy. So why did we bring this book out, and who is it that you're going to be going after this fall? First and foremost, we want you to take a look, and when you get to the sales meeting, we're going to actually provide you this list of leads. So you'll have all these names of people who used the previous edition of Clark, but for whatever reason did not roll to the new edition last year. We want to know, why didn't they roll? Was it because they dropped the book? And if they did drop it, why did they drop it? Was it because it was too much? They weren't getting through all of the content in one semester. Was the price just too much to justify the fact that they weren't using the whole thing? Maybe they still liked that approach, but the principles book was just too much. If that's the case, then you introduce them to Foundations. This could be the good solution. And along the same lines, we want you to be looking for Clark qualified leads. So people who, when you were selling Clark, the full version a year ago, these were people that were warm leads, but for whatever reason, they didn't actually adopt it. Why didn't they adopt it? Would the lighter version of Clark be a better option for them? And then there really is just one specific competitor that we're going after. It's Dickovic. And we are going to spend a few minutes talking about this competitor, how we differ, how we're similar, and how to take them down. But we want you targeting Dickovic. When you see Dickovic, we want you to go in and talk about the Foundations book. And really, you just want to keep the scientific approach in your back pocket when you start talking about comparative. It's a question that you ask. What's the approach of your course? If you start hearing them use words like scientific approach, research methods, statistical analysis, empirical approach, these are all kind of indicators that they might be interested in talking to you about Clark. And if they say, oh, Clark, I know that book, I've seen that book, you know what, it's just too much, make sure that you don't step foot out of that office or out of that call until they know that we have a Clark Lite now available to them. All right, that concludes our competitive portion of this section of the seminar, and actually it concludes the comparative politics section. So thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope that you got a lot out of this. All right, thanks.